actual one that I'll just attach it to, but it'll pop up here in a second. We have begun. All right, so I am joined today by my aunt and uncle, Lori and Shawn Dekeyser, who were part of the group from Fargo that kind of gained a lot of publicity and some maybe unwanted popularity in their excursion over to the Middle East and Israel and that area. They can give you a lot more detail on where they were, what was going on, that sort of thing. But I do want to start with what group were you part of? Was this kind of a group that got ready for this trip like over the course of a few months? Was this like a year-long build up to this trip? I'm not even sure if this is a trip that was attached to the church you attend, but can you kind of talk about how you became part of this group that ended up going basically across the world?
Yeah, it actually was probably almost a year in advance. So it was with Holy Cross Catholic Church in West Fargo, which is not our church. However, right, you know, Desi, our youngest, went to college, and Lori and I said, all right, it's time to travel, right? And we're gonna get going. We always wanted to go on a pilgrimage, you know, either to Rome or the Holy Land. And this opportunity came up, and I approached Lori and I said, you know, we got to go. Let's just do it. And so I think we were actually probably one of the first couples to sign up. And I remember initially it was supposed to be just like 40 people. It was supposed to be one bus, and all of a sudden we heard it's 84. I was like, oh my goodness, what happened? Right? It kept signing up. So yeah, it was a year-long event, and you know, it helped build anticipation and study on where we're going to go and what we're going to do, and yeah.
Okay, so I'm looking back on kind of your timeline on when you departed from the United States. What day did you depart from the United States compared to kind of when all the conflict started to begin over there? Because I know there was really no build up to when, or as far as I can remember from when I was watching all of it sort of start to take place. There's of course no build up. Everything just suddenly happened, kind of catastrophically. But what compared to when you guys left the United States, how did that day and kind of day and time during the week, how did that compare to when everything started to break out over there?
Yeah.
We actually left from Minneapolis, and initially the whole group was supposed to go together through Montreal, and so it came to a point that they couldn't.
The size of the
group got too big, so they had to split us up. So about 30 of us, I believe, went through Toronto, which Lori and I were part of that group.
And again, don't travel with us. Things happen.
Yeah, and then the rest of the group were going to go through Montreal. So they took buses from Holy Cross into Minneapolis, dropped us off at the airport. So our bus actually left 11:30 p.m. on Sunday, and our flight was scheduled to leave like 6:30 a.m. on Monday. And it was actually kind of neat because we were going to beat the other group over to Tel Aviv, and we were going to be the first ones there. And so our flight from Minneapolis to Toronto went great. Everything was smooth. We got to Toronto, had some breakfast or lunch, and then we had quite a bit of a layover, and we ended up getting boarded a little bit late on our plane, and then we sat on the plane for quite a long time because some official paperwork wouldn't go through, and it was like, okay, now we're getting farther and farther behind. And anyway, we finally take off, and these are huge planes. I mean, right, hundreds of people on them. I can't even remember. I think it was like 3 seats, 5 seats in the middle, 3 seats, whatever, 11 across, something like that. And so, I mean, these are big. And we take off, and we get about 2 hours in our flight. So we're basically hitting the Atlantic Ocean, and the captain comes on. Nothing to worry about, but we're having some issues with our hydraulics. We need to turn around and go back to Toronto.
Yeah, so that was interesting because he's like, we'll have to be in a holding pattern and dump fuel. And, you just need to know there will be emergency vehicles on the tarmac and just for precautions and whatever. And so we're like, okay, we're going to fly 4 hours and go nowhere.
Yeah.
But it all was fine. We landed fine. Everything was fine. They found us a new plane. So we were finally back in the air a couple hours later and on our way and exhausted. We slept pretty well on the way there.
What was funny, Kyler, is I told Lori, I said, okay, this is a pilgrimage. Every part of it's in God's plan, so we're just going to let it, and go over to Him. And Lori was like, okay, if that's the worst that happens, all right.
Not knowing.
So we thought, okay, yeah, this is it.
Some foreshadowing going on.
Yeah. So we would have left then a Monday morning, and then Saturday was when things broke out there.
Yeah.
So we had 4 or 5 days of touring before.
Yeah, before it broke out. Yeah. So we ended up being 8 hours late instead of early, and
we missed our first day.
Yeah, they had a half a day of touring that went on, and we missed that. So.
Okay. So for our listeners and viewers who might have caught on to Lori's comment about never traveling with the Dekeyser family, before we jumped on and did start recording this, just so our listeners know, these Lori and Shawn and their 4 kids, who of course are my cousins, were stranded in Disney World when 9/11 took place, to the point where they had to drive home from Florida to North Dakota, of course, because they obviously weren't allowed to fly. So if anyone caught on to Lori's comment about never travel with the Dekeysers, that is why, because they were also out of state during 9/11. So everywhere they go, we just have to call CNN before they leave, so the rest of the country knows something's about to take place.
A caveat is, if you ever want to have an adventure, look what we're doing.
This is true. So before I get into any of the chaos and any of the obviously major conflict that took place in the area you ended up going to, I do want to talk about all the enjoyable parts. I know you just mentioned that you were there for several days before anything tragic even took place in the Middle East. So can you talk about kind of some of the really enjoyable experiences? I know you had a lot of memorable times aside from all of the tragedy that took place over there.
Yeah, so the first half of the trip was in Nazareth, and so basically the northern part of Israel, north of Jerusalem. And so we started in Nazareth, and the very first full day that we got there, we got up and we went to the Church of the Annunciation, right, where the angel Gabriel told Mary that she was going to be with child. And there's actually a connecting church, which is the chapel of St. Joseph, which is where St. Joseph's house was at. So we started there. We had our morning mass, and then went and visited the Church of the Annunciation, which was fairly neat. What was amazing, when you look at where St. Joseph's house was and where Mary's house was, they were really close to one another. I mean, Nazareth, it's big now, but it was a little podunk town,
It was like 300 people or so.
Yeah, it was just, I think in the Bible, somebody said, what good comes from Nazareth, right? And so it was kind of neat to be in that, and we got to see, the little cave area where Mary would have been. It was very neat. The architecture, just the history. That was pretty cool. Mm-hmm. And then I think, was it the next day we went to Cana, right? When did we go to Cana? Yeah, we went to Cana. So that's where, the miracle of the wine, or water turned into wine. And so we got to renew our marriage vows there, and that cool. It was pretty neat. And
yeah, that was, we sampled the wine of Cana, and we actually brought some home with us, so that was kind of neat. I think the one thing that I really enjoyed was the following day we were around the Sea of Galilee, and so we got to see where a lot of things happened there. And I guess the end of the day, the sun was setting, we were on a boat on the Sea of Galilee, and it was just beautiful. And it was just to think about that Jesus had been fishing on that same body of water, and all the things that had happened there was really, to me, was very powerful.
Yeah, that was a really busy day because we had went to the where the Sermon on the Mount occurred. We had an outdoor mass, and then we drove all the way up to Caesarea Philippi. So that's where Peter would have called Jesus the Christ. And so it was a lot of driving, and we got to see a lot of the Sea of Galilee, and just some amazing sights, and also the culture that's there now. So we were on the Sea of Galilee, and there's people out there on jet skis, and
you're like, you shouldn't jet ski on the Sea of Galilee.
They have their boats with their big speakers out there. You can hear Queen playing in the background, and so it's just like these are people that
this is where they live.
This is where they live, and yet there's kind of all this rich history around there. So, and yeah, I'd agree that evening it was just perfectly calm out on the lake, and it was pretty amazing.
The one thing that I did find interesting, that it wasn't a religious thing, but when we were way up north, that's up on the border of Lebanon, and there was an area that was all fenced off with big warning signs because there's live mines in there, and you're not supposed to go in there. And that was kind of a realization of, yeah, there's some things going on in this country that are a little not what we're used to.
Yeah, our tour guide actually had a funny story. I guess two American men were hiking through there, and they found an unexploded rocket. And they thought it would be kind of a neat coffee table thing to bring home. So they put it in their luggage. And
they had some problems in customs.
Problems with customs. I was like, what were you thinking, guys? Come on.
Seemed like a good idea at the time.
Yeah.
Right. Yep.
So geographically speaking, and again, if we were to pull out some maps and look at this area in more detail, what cities or countries, I know a lot of things are very close together in proximity in that area, were you guys able to visit in the time you were over there?
Yeah, so
we flew into Tel Aviv,
which is right on the Mediterranean,
right on the border.
Yeah, border.
And then we stayed in Nazareth for several nights, and that was about an hour from Tel Aviv.
Yeah, it may be just a little. Yeah, about that. Yeah, because Nazareth's kind of in the central middle, in the northern part. Mm-hmm. And then we went to a place called Haifa. So Haifa was it's a port city.
It's on the Mediterranean.
It's on the Mediterranean, and that's where Mount Carmel is, which there's a lot of Old Testament readings dealing with that. And so we went and visited a monastery there, had mass there as well, and then went to this church that kind of overlooked the Kidron Valley, I think. We also went to the Mount of Transfiguration, which it's like, have you ever been on the Beartooth Pass, right? Those switchback roads that it's like only one car can. Yeah, that was pretty scary. They couldn't bring our bus up there, so we had to get on these smaller buses. But it's just like back and forth, and just realizing, man, they had to hike all the way up there, and so that town.
We stayed in Bethlehem several nights. That's where we were at when things kind of took a turn for the worse, but so that's where we were primarily staying. Felt very safe there, and we drove up to Jerusalem one day.
So yeah, so the Sea of Galilee, there's several kind of armlets of the Jordan River that feed in the Sea of Galilee on the north, and so we kind of went to close to some of the headwater areas, and then to the Sea of Galilee, and then the Jordan River goes down to the Dead Sea, and the Dead Sea is way in the south, and so that's the border of Jordan and Israel too. So that kind of gives you the proximity. And the day that Saturday when Hamas had attacked Israel, we were supposed to go to Jericho. I was so pumped too because they kept talking about its date season. They had all these date orchards and that these are the best dates in the whole world. And I like dates, and so we were going to buy dates, and we get right outside of Jericho is where John the Baptist had supposedly baptized Jesus. So we were going to go there first, and so that's all Palestinian territory. And we pull in there, and it's like there's guys with guns there saying, "No, it's shut down. You need to turn around." And our guys, we had left so early, we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know the attacks had taken place, and so they're calling around, and
everybody was on their phone then. They're like, something's going on.
Yeah.
And so we were getting kind of like bits of information from websites and whatnot as to what had happened. And
yeah, and so we were going to go into Jericho since the Jordan River was shut down, and again to get in and out of Jericho, there's checkpoints and long line of cars, and they're searching everything, and that's when I think our tour guide found out what was going on, and they said, let's go to Bethlehem. And our one tour guide was from Bethlehem. She had a house there. Bethlehem, again, it's Palestinian territory, but they're Palestinian Christians. So it's about 60% Christian. So she felt that we'd be safe there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they, initially they were saying, you guys, we live in this is our world. These things happen. We have to just kind of hunker down and let things pass, and it'll all be fine. Let's go to Bethlehem. We'll be safe there, and we'll just see what tomorrow brings. And then after that, it was pretty evident that it was a little more serious than the normal uprising that happens here and there. So
you kind of touched on it, but being a guy myself who gets a lot of my news from social media, a lot of Twitter, whether it's factual information or not so factual information. Again, you just kind of touched on it a little bit. What were kind of the sources of news that you guys were receiving over there? Was it from the main people who are maybe in charge of your group? Was it just the public becoming more knowledgeable of it? What kind of news sources? Again, you might hear something on the street, but you don't know if it's factual or not at the moment. And some of that can be very aggressive information. Some of it can be pretty laid back, especially since you guys noted that they continue to tell you this happens all the time until you find out that it's a lot more than that what was expected.
Mm-hmm.
So you're limited, right? Every hotel honestly, the hotels were very, very nice.
We were nice hotels. We had cable TV or whatever, but you had to find an English speaking source of the news, so that did limit it.
Right, and you had so the main sources of news that we had over there were Al Jazeera in English, CNN, and then the local paper, which is I think it was like the Israel or Times of Israel or something like that. And so you kind of had to sort through, all those to figure out, what's true and what's not. I mean, you actually had three different points of view, kind of a Palestinian, American, and then an Israeli. And so, you kind of had to figure it out. Yeah, it was, we watched some of that. I'll be honest. I was more interested in continuing the pilgrimage at that point.
And we did. We did continue even after that. We spent 2 more days in Bethlehem, and we saw all the things in Bethlehem that there were to see. And then we did go one day up to Jerusalem, and there's a lot to see in Jerusalem, but we got to see just a little sliver, which I was happy that we were able to do that. But it did end kind of abruptly. I mean, our tour guides were afraid that the checkpoint to get out of Jerusalem was going to close. So there was a point where it was like, we got to go now.
Yeah.
And everybody got on the bus and we got out. And once we got past the checkpoint, it was like, you could just visibly see our tour guides just,
Yeah.
So that was a little intense, but because we really didn't know, okay, why are we hurrying here?
Yeah.
Until afterwards. So.
Yeah, and when we went to Jerusalem, we did what's called the Way of the Cross. So you basically can start where the scourging at the pillar happened. You couldn't do the praetorium where Pilate condemned Jesus, because that actually was a mosque. They open it up once a week for Christians on Fridays, but you couldn't start there. So we started, and anyway, we went through that, and as we were going, they got to the point we could hear the rockets, the bombs going off, and you could kind of feel them, and
you could tell it was distant. But it was a little unnerving.
Yeah, it hit would have been Western Jerusalem, and they have that, I can't even remember, the Iron Dome or whatever. So they have those interceptor rockets, but and then we got to go see the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So it has a part of the tomb of Jesus, and then where the cross was, and I don't know if they had decided we were going to do more that day, but I think
we were supposed to.
I think hearing the bombs in the distance, they said, it's time to go. And then the next day, that's when they decided we got to get you out to Jordan.
Well, we were kind of waiting for our flights to be canceled. That was the big thing, because we all had flights flying out of Tel Aviv on Thursday, and until they actually canceled those flights, I mean, that was the plan, that we would go to Tel Aviv. The airport was still open, but there weren't any planes coming in, so we were fairly certain that we weren't going to be leaving. But until they actually canceled our flight, we really couldn't plan for something different. And then that's, they did cancel it then, and then it was like, all right, plan B, we're going to go to Jordan.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, I do have, again, several other questions still to ask, but you've kind of hit a little bit on each of them. One of my questions, and you again touched on it a little bit, was when the tension started to rise a little bit more, and it started to become real that you were in an area that you probably don't want to be in for much longer. Personally and as a group, did the anxiousness, did the nervousness levels rise, or we're in a group, we're kind of in this together, we have people with us that know where to go? Were you pretty confident that you're going to be okay, or were there times, I mean, as Shawn just said, there's explosions going on miles from you? That probably isn't the most heartwarming sound to hear, but can you kind of talk about kind of how your level of anxiety rises quickly, or did it stay pretty level most of the time?
Why don't you start?
All right. So I tell everybody this story, Kyler. I had mentioned that we went to Mass the very first day in the Chapel of St. Joseph, and it was about in the middle of this Mass, I had this just incredible sense of peace just kind of wash over me. It was more intense than I've ever felt in my whole life, and I really felt God saying, "Hey, just live moment by moment. Just be in the moment." And that peace never left me the whole trip. I was never anxious. I always knew I didn't know what was going to be the end, but I always knew it was in God's hands, and whatever happened, we were going to be all right. And so, I never had any anxiety.
And I am more high strung than Shawn is. So there were times where I was just like, oh, should I be nervous? What should we be doing? And then I'd look at him and I'd be like, we're good. We're fine. So we were fine. We had each other. We felt calm. We felt, this is all happening for a reason. There's something we're supposed to learn from this. Maybe our kids are supposed to learn from this.
Yeah.
I don't know. But not everybody in our group was fine. So there definitely were different ways of dealing with the stress and the lack of control, I would say, because we really didn't. I mean, we had no control over what was happening and what was going to happen. So you really did have to turn it over to God and say, we trust that you're going to either bring us home or whatever your plan is for us. So
yeah, adversity will tell you the state people are in at that time, and sometimes people aren't ready for that, and so it kind of, you can imagine it can bring out angst, anger, worry. Well, I think Lori and I were in a pretty good state, and which, hopefully that helped others too. There were those that were just like, hey, it is what it is, and we're going to be fine. And so there was, like I said, there was different levels, as you can imagine.
And I never felt like we weren't going to get home, but it was kind of like, well, if we don't, I guess we don't. It is what it is, and yeah.
It was more, how long are we going to be here?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, what can we do now? So let's
take advantage of.
Let's discover Jordan, right?
Yeah. It's a very impressive story of kind of coping and staying neutral. So kudos to both of you for being able to just kind of control what you can control, which I tell my students and my family members all the time, which obviously your guys' experience is a whole lot different than I've ever had to go through. But I know I was talking to Justin and Monica kind of daily, just getting the daily story. For viewers and listeners who don't know who that is, those are their two oldest kids, Justin and Monica. And Justin would just send me screenshots and when I read through them, like they seem like they're not too worried about anything. But as the way you stated it, I wonder how long are we going to be here was kind of a better way to look at it probably in the moment. But another question that, again, you kind of touched on, and I literally have traumatic question mark written next to it. But were you ever near any of the, I know you talked about hearing explosions in the far distance, but to the point where you're kind of worried level, this is closer than I expected it. This is getting interesting and we need to get out of here sooner rather than later. Was any of the catastrophe kind of got closer to you more than you expected?
It was kind of funny
When
those bombs were going off in Jerusalem. Lori goes, "That was thunder, right?" I was like, "You tell yourself whatever you need to."
Like that was thunder.
Yeah, no, like I said, we were pretty at ease.
Yeah, we never really, I mean, I think the one thing that I saw that made me go, yeah, this is maybe more serious or whatever, is when we were in Bethlehem, there were like there were people trying to get gas. They were lined up ridiculously long lines and people running with like gas cans and things like that because they were worried about the supply of gas. And I thought, oh, this is serious. They're worried about war and gas. This is serious. But I never felt physically threatened by anything that was going on.
That was kind of amazing to see. That line was forever.
Oh, it was like, good luck.
Man, we had, so the roads over there, just imagine, one lane here that's how wide their 2 lanes are. I'm exaggerating, but we had this bus driver. This guy was the most amazing driver ever. I cannot believe the corners. He could back in a place that had 2 inches on either side and get it perfect. And anyway, he saw that long line and he knew that, okay, we got to go around this way and back. And it was like, well, wow, we just got to our hotel really easy. thought we were going to have to wait in line for all these guys. And yeah, our tour guides, bus drivers were all
great.
Amazing. They were always calm too.
Mm-hmm.
Probably helped a little bit, I'm sure, with the overall feeling, being around people who are from there, live there maybe, and another sense of security maybe. So again, you guys were part of a larger group that again gained a little more publicity when the news came on each night in North Dakota, meaning that Fargo people were over in that area during war outbreak, of course. Obviously you weren't just there by yourselves. Again, you were in this pretty large group of people. Was being part of this group of larger people with, again, more people that probably knew what was going on and where you needed to go at what time, what day, that sort of thing. Did that change any of your group's plans, especially on trying to get out, knowing that you guys didn't really decide that? It was more so the people in charge of the group. Was there, did that help a lot with the process of getting home when you needed to get home? Was being part of a larger group of people and not just on your own?
I would say it was probably both a positive and a negative at times. I mean, because when you do have to find flights for 80 some people, obviously that's a little bit more difficult than if it would have been a group of 40 or whatever. But I also feel like people were contacting our legislators and that saying, hey, we're here, we might need help getting out of here. And if you've got a group of 84, they're more likely to hear you. Thankfully, we did not need government help to get out, but that could have worked to our advantage as having a larger group. But it also, 84 people, 84 personalities, 84 ways of dealing with things.
Yeah.
Probably for the tour guides was pretty stressful. Again, Shawn and I just tried to sit back and just let things unfold how they were going to unfold and not try to provide our opinion on things and let them take care of us.
Yeah, our tour guide was amazing. She really was, and so we had several tour guides, but the main one that set it all up was what's her name?
Jane Alatrash.
Jane Alatrash, and she just really deserves kudos. But she was dealing with so many people that Lori and I felt that she's already enough pressure. We'll just, if we can help, she'll ask us. If not, let's not bother. Yeah. So when we went to Jordan, which we actually were in a very nice hotel there, we hung out by the pool and just relaxed. Yeah.
I remember, I think Grandma Gloria was talking about, I think she asked Monica, she said, I hope they're doing all right. I hope they're doing all right. And like Monica sent her a picture of Lori with a beer by the pool. She's like, I think they're doing okay now.
Yeah.
Oh, we just had time. We were just waiting at that point.
Yeah.
So kind of stepping towards your guys' journey of the border and getting through the border, when you were able to cross the border of Jordan, I believe, you might have to remind me on which borders you were crossing at the moment, but there were a lot of sources saying that you were one of the last groups to get out that day. Is that an accurate statement from the news source? And were you pretty confident that you'd be able to get out that day, or was that kind of an up in the air? I'm not sure what's going to actually, what exactly is going to happen today.
Yeah, I think it is accurate, but if you actually look at the border crossing, it closes at 10 p.m. every day. That's just standard operating procedure. So it wasn't like, oh, they weren't going to let anybody else, because it was like, no, that's because of the time they closed.
And
right?
I think they let so many through per day is what we kind of found out after the fact.
Yeah.
We didn't know that going into it. I mean, I just had every confidence that we were crossing that day and that's what was going to happen. But I do think there is truth that it did close, and maybe even before then, because once we got over, we went through, paid our money to pass through, showed our passports. We got on another bus that took us over to where we had to go through customs. There were buses that were coming and dropping people off, but there weren't a lot of them that came after us. So that probably is accurate that we were one of the last ones across that day. The next day, I'm sure there were others, but it took a long time. Even after we got passed through there, we stood around outside for probably
hours.
3 hours, 4 hours maybe. I don't even know how long it was. But
well, there were so many people, Kyler, that were and you still have to go through the official customs of getting your passport checked, and it just
scan your luggage, and
I'm sure the Jordanian officials weren't expecting it, and but they did the best they could. At the point of when we knew we were going to go to Jordan, our tour guide. So basically, our tour bus cannot cross the border. I mean, they had to drop us off, and so our tour guide had to hook up with another tour guide from Amman, Jordan, and so they helped out as quickly as possible. And again, they got us buses to get us to Amman. So I mean, it worked out as smooth as it could be, but you can imagine just being bombarded with all these requests on both sides, that it takes time. So it took a lot of patience.
It definitely was a lesson in patience, because there were hours that just nothing seemed to be happening, but we were just waiting our turn. And I think probably one of the more stressful times for me in that is when we did check our passports. They wanted to keep our passports, and I was kind of like, we have to give them our passports. And because we were part of a large group, they had to double check our passports against a sheet. But that created some stress for a lot of people, because it was kind of like, I'm handing them over my passport. But it was fine, worked out.
That's one thing you don't realize until you're in an area like that. Your passport is
your
key.
Life.
That's your life. You got to have that at all times. So but again, it's just, I don't know. I just let my mind go on other things. Well, man, there was like so many wild dogs around there. It's ridiculous. See dogs roaming around. I was like, look, there's another dog, Lori.
And he loves plants. That's his job. That's his life. He'd be off looking at plants, and I'd be like, there he goes again.
And honestly, when we were at the border, it was a beautiful sunset that night.
Yeah, it was.
It's just, getting your mind occupied on other things.
Well, good. So you guys get through the border, as you just talked about. How were your, kind of take me through your travels home? Was it kind of the way you saw it out when they laid it out for you? Was how much different was your return back to the United States compared to what it was supposed to be?
Everybody's was different. I mean, so they were just grabbing flights however they could to get flights initially. Ours ended up to be very similar to what we were a day behind when we were supposed to come back. We were supposed to come back on a Thursday. We came back on a Friday, but we ended up going back through Toronto, which I was a little nervous about after our first experience on the way there, but everything went fine, and we were able to get home.
Yeah, it was just waiting till a flight opened up that we could get on together.
Because we weren't the only tour bus that had come across, and even in our hotel, there were other groups that were there that were trying to do the same thing that we were. They're trying to get flights out of Amman to wherever. And word was that our legislators were working on getting commercial planes in there so that they could absorb or add more flights for people that were trying to get out. I don't know if that happened or not. I don't. I mean, we got a flight and we were happy. And
so it was. I mean, part of it was just waiting to get that information. And once you got your flight, then you can kind of go do what you wanted to. I don't know. Do you know anything about Jordan at all?
Very little. I looked at a few maps throughout your guys' time over there just to kind of get an idea of where everything was. I know the Gaza was going crazy, and I see videos like crazy. I'm on Twitter quite a bit for teaching stuff, and I mean all sorts of just news stuff because like I said, that's where I get most of my news. So I know it just continues to. It seems like it continues to get worse and worse as the days go on. But I don't. Again, you see stuff and you don't know how factual it is and who's posting it and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So Jordan's actually kind of a neat country in itself. Got a lot of really like historic Roman ruins, for example. But there's this one area called Petra. Have you ever heard of Petra?
I have heard of it.
Yeah. So Raiders of the Lost Ark, right? With the third one, that church in the side of a rock. That's there. And I was like, oh man. We should go down to that. I mean, we had a day basically to tour, and
You just didn't have time.
and it was 3 hours down, 3 hours back, and so we wouldn't have had time to do it considering our flight. So we ended up running around Amman a little bit. We went to
a museum.
Went to the Jordan Museum, which was very well developed. Everything is in Arabic and English, so I mean it was a really neat museum. They had some of the Dead Sea Scrolls there, just a lot of prehistory, and yeah, that was pretty good. And then we got to be in Old Amman, which Amman's a huge city.
Big, yeah.
4.5 million people.
Yes.
The one thing that my takeaway from being in Amman is I almost felt like we had gone back to maybe the 70s, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, they had ashtrays like in the restaurants, and I'm like, I haven't seen an ashtray in I can't tell you how many years. And so they smoke inside. The hotels you can smoke in your room.
We didn't do that.
We didn't.
Surprise.
They had hookah things at the little cafes
course.
in the hotel that we were in, and then just the hotel staff too were men. You didn't really see a lot of women working like in the stores or anything. It was, and that's a cultural thing, but it was just interesting.
Gotcha. All right. Well, you guys returned home safely, of course. You made it. Have you taken time at all to reminisce at all with the people you were over there? I don't know how good of friends you are with anybody who was in your group. Was this something that you're like, we just need some time to not talk or think about everything we just went through? Have you had time to sit down with these people and kind of talk about your own experiences?
Only with one of the priests, we've really, Father Braun, we visited a little bit with him, but they are going to try to get together. So Jane Alatrash, who we mentioned, who was the tour group leader, she's from Michigan, but she's going to be in town at the beginning of December, and they're trying to put together kind of a little social that we can all kind of get together and reminisce a little bit.
I'll be honest, Kyler, you can imagine being gone for 2 weeks and then coming back to work, and it's just, I just like trying to
after
catch
that
up
kind of trip, what it turned into,
yeah, and so we've been so busy
we have been
just with life that we just haven't had time. I mean, we talk with each other about things, and of course, you have to tell the story to all your work colleagues, and but yeah, we're trying to. Lori's gonna, how she likes her scrapbooking. She's gonna try to create a booklet of the trip and with our kind of our notes throughout, which I think is going to be good. It'll be a good memory for us, and just to kind of wrap our mind too about, what all happened, what graces came out of it, and yeah.
So maybe a question you might chuckle about, but would you go back to the same place when the world kind of settles back down to normal, or was this a trip that you said, okay, we did it, we're gonna go on to the next one?
I think we have to go back now.
Yeah. We saw a lot, but we missed some key things too that we really wanted to take part
I
in.
really wanted to swim in the Dead Sea. I just think that I mean, because I don't know if you've seen pictures of people that, I mean, it's so, the salt content is so high, you float.
Yeah.
And the mud is supposed to have these great or what do I want to say?
Rejuvenating
qualities. So I thought maybe I'd look way younger coming back. But that didn't
Worth a try, right?
Yeah. The one travel guide said, yeah, he goes, men, hold your wives' hands when they go in, because they'll be 15 years younger when they come out. You might not recognize them. And women, don't go in too many times. Yeah, those dates in Jericho, I really miss them.
Yeah, probably not anytime soon, but yeah, we'd like to go back.
And now that, I didn't know that's where, Jordan was where Petra was at. I was like, I want to hop over there too, which it's literally on the other side of the Dead Sea. And so you could easily go over there. And I think there's a checkpoint there. We couldn't go across that checkpoint. There was one checkpoint where
we had to go way north.
So we actually had to go almost all the way back up to Nazareth and over, which was quite a ways. But yeah, so I'd definitely go back. And I'd actually encourage anybody that finds interest in that at all to go if you have the ability.
Awesome. So my last kind of just curiosity question, since you've returned home, I know the war is still going on over there and all sorts of tragedy and horrific things taking place for various reasons, but are you guys still kind of tuned into what's going on over there? Do you pay attention at all to the continuation of it? Keep up to date, or is this kind of something you've put behind you and you don't want to see it or hear about it anymore?
He does.
I check, what I can't remember the Times of Israel, whatever that news source, once a day. It is a tragedy. It really is. And our one tour guide, he was great. This guy was so knowledgeable about everything. He's a walking encyclopedia. He was really
young guy.
He'd been married for 3 years. This was his full-time job. He had a 9-month-old daughter, first kid. He's out of a job now, and it's like, okay, when is this gonna end? So.
And they had just kind of made it through COVID, and tourism was starting to kind of come back for them again. And a lot of them, that's how they make their living. That's what they do. So yeah, it was kind of heartbreaking. We dropped him off in Jerusalem on our way to the border, and just watching him walk away from the bus was just, it's like, what's he gonna do?
Yeah. And I don't think people realize this, that Christians, if I remember correctly, make up about 1.4% of the population over there. So they're definitely a minority group. And they get, literally caught in the crossfire, right? And so it's a sad situation over there for Christians.
Yeah, like I said, before I even jumped on, we watch CNN 10 every day in class, and I like it because it even keeps me up to date. So CNN 10 is a lot of just neutral things. It's tailored to middle school, high school, and elementary students. And I mean, I've had some parents in the past question us watching it because, of course, politics and presidential campaigns are starting up again, but I think they do a really good job of just informing us about the news and not taking a left or right side, which is, again, why I like to watch it. But I know I've had students just ask me why this type of thing is taking place, and really the only answer I can think of from my knowledge is just the overpowering. I tell them that some of it doesn't make sense because they just do it because they have more power. Kind of how they train their people. I don't really know where to go with that, but trying to make it sense to a bunch of 10-year-olds has been interesting versus what they might be hearing at home, as you might imagine.
Yeah, and I think the thing for people to remember is that it's not the United States. I mean, we tend to know what we know, and we try to put it into context of that, and the culture is different, mentality is different, it's the history, and supposedly it was the 50th anniversary of some other attack. It was why it happened on that date, which we're like, I wish we would have known that.
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't have guessed though.
No.
Either way. I mean,
No.
there's always an anniversary of something happening, right? That's supposedly why 9/11 happened on 9/11, right? And so, how can you really know? But,
Yeah. And there was, speaking of 9/11, is one of the news commentators over there was trying to put it into perspective, what's going on there to Americans, and he said that event was like Pearl Harbor and 9/11 combined into one for their country. That's how devastating and terroristic, maybe.
Yeah.
That it was.
So before I do sign off with you guys, and I thank you guys for joining me to share your story, a lot of interesting things going on, of course. But before we do sign off, is there anything from either of you that you'd like to share? Whether it was something that caught your mind, maybe even by the time you got home, something that popped into your head, maybe an experience, or maybe something. I know you talked about you learned a lot about patience and coping with things when you really can't control anything around you. But anything else you'd like to share?
I think the only other thing about the trip in general is I was really ready for a burger by the time I got back.
Interesting food. Yeah.
Lots of rice and eggplant. They could make eggplant 100 different ways. Yeah.
And hummus at every meal.
Hummus. Yep, that was good.
Better like hummus.
It's interesting you say that, because when I went to South America with my college group, when we went down to Peru, I remember sitting in the airport on the way back, and everyone asked, or our professors, because again, I was with the college group, they said, what's the first thing you're going to eat when you get home? And I said, I'm going straight to McDonald's for a double cheeseburger. And we got home, and when they talk about processed foods and adjusting back to it, it's real. I think my mom was worried about me. I didn't eat much for like 5 days. I said, I'm hungry, but nothing sounds good. So it's kind of funny that you mentioned that, because I said the exact same thing, and it took me a couple days to just go, okay, now I'm hungry for this. I need to go. And I wasn't starving by any means, but it was definitely a feeling that was nothing I've ever expected before.
Yep, they eat differently.
This is something that's kind of an aside that I thought was interesting, is the crops that they grew there. Again, they had a lot of date farms, which are these big kind of like palm trees, but they grew bananas, they grew mangoes, they grew avocados. Of course, olives are everywhere. That's the big thing. And
yeah, we ate a lot of olives.
A lot of olives, yeah. And so just to kind of see that part of the culture and society and the agricultural side. And it was like, these are just people like you and me, right? Trying to make it through life, and they adapt to the region they're in. So.
All right. Well, thank you guys for joining me and sharing your story. I think it was really cool. Hopefully, viewers, listeners, however people like to take their information in, find it interesting. And I hope you guys are looking forward to the scrapbook. I haven't seen a scrapbook in a very long time, but looking forward to seeing some pictures during the holidays. So thank you guys for joining me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Kyler.
Thanks, Kyler.